Hi.
Hello. Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you all for braving the MTA. I had, it took me 30 minutes to go 4 stops from Queens, so that was great. Great start to my morning. I guess we'll introduce ourselves.
Yeah.
Yes. My name is Diep Tran. I am the editor-in-chief of Playbill. And you may follow me on Twitter at Deep Thought, because I like to start things on there.
Hi, I'm Clint Ramos. My pronouns are he, him, and I make things. I collaborate with folks. I help run things, and I'm primarily through design, but I'd like to think of myself as a cultural pot stirrer.
And that's why we're friends.
And that's
Hi, my name is Jeanette Oi-Suk Yew. I consider myself a theater designer by trade. What I aim to do is actually to be the best collaborator in every setting that I can possibly be, because I think that's actually the hardest thing to do. And with that, I'm just going to end.
So I came up with the topic of this discussion because originally the Park Avenue Armory came to me with the topic of designing the Asian American experience. And then I thought, that's very vast, because there is no one Asian American experience. And so I wanted to talk to the two of you about just how we create cultural specificity when we're designing, especially when it's a culture not of our own, because the two of you, like Clint, you have designed for Filipino-themed shows, but you've also designed for K-pop and for classic plays. And Jeanette, I don't think you've ever designed anything that's Chinese-specific.
No, I don't think so. I mean, years ago when I was in Seattle, I've done something, but sorry. No, I was trying to think. No, I don't think so. Years ago when I was in Seattle, I think I was involved more and have done something. I've actually done with a youth theater, I actually done a Chinese opera that was translated into English. Has its own weird journey, but I won't go into it. But short answer, yes.
Yeah, because I feel like when we're talking about ethnic groups, we tend to lump everyone together and think, oh, you're Asian, so you must know about all of these countries and their cultures and histories and can work on these shows. But I'm guessing that is not the case.
yeah. I mean, it's so okay. We have an hour. Cultural specificity. I mean, it is, clearly it's a Northern Star, right? But I think, even cultural competency is sort of like a goal that, I think for me at least, I can speak only for myself, I always fail at, right? I think that's just the nature of creating theater. I think part of it too, Deep, as you were saying, the Asian thing, it made me think about the Asian diaspora is the largest diaspora, right? And so and when you think about it, because that encompasses basically near Asia to Southeast Asia, right? And for me, I always go back to this idea of okay, so why did I want to do theater? And I always go back to this idea that it allows me to visit these worlds that I've never visited before, right? But then I think when I moved to America, I think my views are constantly evolving around how we actually do this responsibly, right? And I don't know what the answer is really, but to me, it always goes back to this idea of decolonization, right? And what is it really, and what does it mean to our practice, and how do we actually negotiate culture versus cultural appropriation, and where is that line, right? Basically, because it could be argued that cultural appropriation is culture, right? Like I wore pajamas last night, for instance, right? And that's Turkish, and so I ate something today that was not necessarily my culture. And so I think for me, what's exciting as a practitioner is how to negotiate those terms, right? But also when I have commissions that are not my culture, not necessarily my culture, then it is a gift, because it makes me examine appropriateness. It makes me examine sort of my place in the global community, but it also, it makes me examine what I firmly believe in according to sort of those decolonization terms, I know this is like a convoluted answer to your question, but like I don't know how to create culturally specific work without like thinking about how to work, and how we create work.
Yeah. Jeanette, is that something you think about? Because yours is projection and lighting, and a lot of people would assume, lighting is very neutral.
No. I mean, I think the tricky things about lighting, in general, right? I think that I'm trying to think about how to start it. Okay, I'm going to start it by this story from teaching, because I consider my teaching part of my practice, my artistic practice. And so a couple years ago, there are some students who came to me and wanted to talk about how come in the design we don't have like a specific class on how to do like sort of world design, or like a lot of the design conversation, particularly because of like how easy to get the information in the textbook and so on and so forth, always start with like a little bit, if you talk about design, you talk about like the Greek and what the Greek did, and then you move forward to like the Renaissance, and then you move, right? But really that's like a Western trajectory of design. There was like a lot of theater design that existed all around the world in many different ways. And in fact, a lot of it, I'll argue, that doesn't start with even textual base. It starts with very ritualistic, with trying to solve a problem in the community that become theatrical and so on and so forth. But that being said, they were saying that, well, how come we don't have a class just on like world design? And I said to them that I actually have a big problem with that, because then it is about the other. We're constantly trying to say that there is the main thing, and then there is the other. And we're all being grouped into the other. So when you start talking about lighting design, about like, how do I light other skin tone that is not Caucasian white people? Then you're doing that, right? You like somehow assuming that the Caucasian white is like a thing. And then there was the rest of us whom like, I'm looking around this room, I'm going like, I don't know what that one normal skin tone is in this room that I'm lighting, right? And so we constantly like doing that, which is this desire for like cultural specificity, is that, right? That somehow there is like, I don't know, like no culture, like white is just normal culture. I don't know what that even to describe. And then there's like culture. And so we have to deal with culture. So what are you going to do about it? And you're like, they're just this is people's stories, experiences.
It's so funny that you say, because then then the fallback is the default, the neutral, right? But like, unfortunately, the neutral and the default here is whiteness, And so to me, I think it's really about like, well, what are we actually doing? When you, just as an example, right? When I did Wild Goose Dreams, right, by Hansel Jong, and it was set in Seoul, and it was about it was a Korean story about this love affair between a man from the South and a woman from the North, right, and I think part of the sort of like initial kind of like response would be, how do I get this like right? Like, is there enough research in the world that I can do to make me appropriate for this project, right? And the answer is, of course, no, right? And so I just hold close to the playwright and almost have her, for me at least, guide it, right? Guide the sort of design, the impulses that I have. And that to me was really helpful. But I also know that in terms of positioning myself as a designer, as part of that collaborative team, I knew where I fell in the spectrum of, frankly, white and black in this country, because we see race here primarily in this country as between white and black folks. And so it's a lot of like internal negotiations that sometimes I don't think a lot of folks actually consider. It's a lot of what designers of color have to go through, you know, particularly because we are conscious of it, you know. We know where we fall in the spectrum, and I've been in this business enough to know that it's probably something that my white colleagues were privileged enough not to consider, at least in the early part of my career. And so I don't know how to be culturally specific, you know. I know that I can aim towards a cultural competency that falls within my decolonization practice. And let me just sort of like kind of unpack that a little bit, because for me, when I talk about decolonization, it's less about going to sort of a pre-colonial kind of mindset or a state of indigeneity, but it's really about acknowledging that we live in a colonial society, right? And things are the way they are because of systems and ideology that extracted and also erased, right? And so within that, I think when you belong to a system that does that, it normalizes that practice, right? And what happens when you normalize that practice is that you actually cannot see things beyond it. You actually see, well, things are the way they are. Right? Like these are just the way, this is the way we do things here. And to me, a lot of my practice, at least in the last 10 years, have been sort of re-examining that. You know, I can't go back to a pre-colonial state, you know, but what I know that I have is pre-colonial ancestral wisdom that runs through my blood. And to me, it's always about tapping. And I know this sounds esoteric, but tapping that and thinking about like how can I do this right? I also have to consider that I migrated to America, right? And in its most ideal form, really, it is about an exchange of culture, right? The question then is, who gets to exchange cultures, right? And who has been exchanging cultures? And what does that exchange look like? Was it extractive, or was it, you know, was it a practice of erasure? And how do we mitigate that? You know, and so it's always been about that in terms of like how to get specific culturally on a particular project.
Yeah. The next question I wanted to ask then, getting to that, I mean, you know, is like in response to what you said, is this notion of accuracy. Because I watch a lot of costume YouTube, and there's a whole genre of costume YouTube where they just rate the accuracy of different film costumes, and I love it. It's so educational. Because for me as a Vietnamese person, and if you know me, like you know I've talked at length about this in other venues, but I hate Miss Saigon. And the big reason I hate Miss Saigon is particularly in the most recent revival, the ao dai she is wearing is not accurate. In one scene, in the wedding scene, she's wearing the headdress that Vietnamese women wear on our wedding day, and then they have her put a veil over it, which is not accurate. And I cannot think of why they would do that unless they were trying to denote to non-Vietnamese people that, oh, this is a wedding scene. So instead, and so many times we've seen it in design where instead of just letting the audience be uncomfortable and try to figure out for themselves the context of the scene and these characters, they give the audience a visual shortcut so that they can feel more comforted. And so for the two of you, when you're designing, like, and I know it's always like in Suicide Forest sometimes, it's sometimes a dream space where accuracy is not, you're not going for 100% accuracy. So can you tell me about the negotiations of that, of when you're going for accurate versus when you're giving something to the audience or letting it be an artistic choice?
Clint is looking at me, so he's like, he wants me to start this conversation.
No, I just want to hear you.
Can you hear me? First of all, I mean, like I can do the cheapest opt-out by saying as a lighting designer, I don't have to think about it. Literally, I said that in the New York Times that there's no racially, culturally correct lighting design, or even historical accuracy. Because I would, if you do Shakespeare, I'll give you a candle and like you go nuts and like, and then give me the check. That's what I would do with that. I think ultimately it goes back to we as a team of creators have to ask each other, what are we aiming to do with that symbol? I think that's the thing. I think with design, ultimately, it is a symbol and it's semiotic. And like in the minute that you saw, I mean, I have to admittedly say I have never seen the production of Miss Saigon. So I can, it sounds like I'm okay. But the minute that you mentioned the foul, I immediately go like, oh yeah, because we worry that they don't know that this is a wedding. And so they want to signify it in some way. And I think that in design, there's always this thing because we're, and so I think as creator, we have the responsibility as a team for ourselves to think about what is it that we are trying to use this symbol to say. I worked on a production of Pinkolandia in New Jersey in Two River many years ago. And it was really important to us that we do not want to translate the Spanish that was in it. And we come up with the idea that, we not come up with the idea, but we went back and forth a little bit. And one of the reasons that Andrea, who's the playwrights, basically say that the play was actually about a teenager who is Chilean, whose family have exiled from Chile, and because of Pinochet, and then come to America, and she was growing up in this household, knowing that something have happened, but didn't know what have happened, and so the fact that the parents were speaking Spanish to each other, and her as a teenager is, even though she understands the language, that's not the reason. But her experiences as a character is actually always feeling like she's an outsider. That something have happened in that generation that she have no access to, and then the story basically consequently work with her, basically having a dream space of trying to like imagine what have happened to like, and her being a central character in it. So in a really weird way, that not translating it and put the audience into the same place that the central character is experiencing. So this is all to say, I think that, but it was after like a very long discussion that we come to that, and then we get clarity as maker, and then we can stand by the choice that we made. So I think ultimately the question becomes like, can we all stand by the choice that we made? Is the question.
Yeah, I think that's I in my process, and I found this because I think in your case, right, particularly with Miss Saigon, I feel like they should have gotten that headdress right. If it's a wedding headdress, it ought to be a wedding headdress. But I think for me, what that process entails is that I'm not Vietnamese. If I were designing it, I'm not Vietnamese, and so I go back to the sort of what the process is design-wise, right? Which is always about an emotional response, right? And you design a series of of experiences, so the sort of the emotional ethos of each scene is translated to the audience, right? And that all collaborators can contribute towards, right? Like okay, so we want this to really hit the audience in the heart. This one is, you know, this and this and that. But then when it comes to the details, I need a lot of help. Right, because I will never be Vietnamese. Like when I did K-pop, it was clear to me, you know, although I can probably direct the emotional trajectory of the musical through clothing, I could not get into, I will need a lot of help actually going into the specificity, not only of Korean culture, but the multi-layers of colonization that Korea had gotten, right? And so I needed, for me, I needed a Korean collaborator to do that with, who also is a fantastic, excellent designer, who did not have the privileges that I had, right? Which is like, you know, a long career, you know, an established career and all that kind of stuff. And so for me, it's really about, there are things that you ought to just get right, you know, and by right, I mean photographically right. Right, like that is, you know, that is paramount. And then there are things that, you know, in context, what I could contribute is towards a more emotional specificity. I just did The Far Country, The Atlantic by Lloyd Suh, who is a Korean American who wrote about a Chinese American experience. And we dealt with a particular dialect of Chinese that were written on walls. I don't read those things. I can't read them. I don't understand. I don't even have the nuances of that. So that's actually when you say, hey, I need help. You know, I just cannot, I need your help here. And that's a long kind of process of literally allowing people into your head. And that's freeing, you know, but it wasn't the way we were trained, right? We were trained in a very specific Western way here that we, I think, as practitioners, I can only speak for myself, but I'm sure this is happening to you. It's a matter of unlearning every day what we learned, right? Not getting rid of it, but really just being able to sort through our training, our, the business, the industry, and the traditions of the industry, and what is required now culturally.
Right. And what does that entail? Because I feel like that's connected. Yeah. I feel like that's connected to what me and Jeanette were talking about backstage, which was this New York Times article that recently ran about the Symposium. And at the very end, Adam Rigg, a very amazing set designer, he critiqued Ain't No Mo on Broadway and the fact that they had white designers who were not in the off-Broadway team designing for the Broadway production.
Whoop.
And him saying, why would you have white people design a black show? And then the comments, do not ever read the comments, but...
But you're going to tell us what the comments are, I have a feeling.
I'm going to tell you what the comments are, because I feel like when we get... Because the theater depends on the audience, and some people in the audience may have questions about it.
Yeah.
And the comments were... Are you then saying that, for example, Asian people should not be able to design, you know, Caucasian works? And I feel like the conversation when we're talking about including more people in the room and making it a more diverse process and allowing for cultural authenticity, there's always the default response, which is, oh, then if white designers cannot design a black show, then does that then mean that, you know, black designers cannot design for white shows? It's always a trading. If you're excluding me from this table, then I'm allowed to exclude you from this other table. And so, like, how do we get beyond this notion of, like, this push and pull?
Oh, she told us the comments. Do you want to go or? I mean, because this is like an hour, y'all, and I'm just like, oh, this conversation is now. I don't know if there's a right answer to that, you know.
But I think it goes like back to what you were saying, Clint, about undo this tradition.
Yeah,
We live in a capitalistic society
Yeah,
where if one person gains something, someone else has to lose something.
I'm going to answer your question circuitously.
Yeah.
The last survey that APAC did, the Association of Asian American Performers, did surveying off-Broadway and Broadway, because I know y'all love data. Out of all of the shows off-Broadway and Broadway, the average is that something like 97.8% of the shows are designed by white designers. That includes black plays, Asian plays, MENA plays, indigenous plays, right? And I'm not even going to talk about directors, right? So part of this, I think the comment is rooted deeply in white supremacy, right? Like this this ideology that somehow white folks or white designers have, and designers of color began at an equal field, right? And we can talk about equity, but we only have 1 hour. But it's really about, that. For me, we have to start at this point of, well, the question was, is it appropriate for a white designer to design a black show? I can't answer that question for that designer, right? That is a personal, like they chose to take on that project and whatever. I know that there's a embarrassingly rich pool of black designers who are able to design that show, right? The question then is, why weren't they tapped, right? And what systems prevented us from both vetting them, from letting them in the room? What are the systems that prevented that? And what were because it was, I almost can see how the process went. Here's an established white designer who constantly delivers great work, and this work always comes on budget and blah, blah, blah. Would it be easier to actually get that designer or take a chance on another designer, right, who we haven't vetted? And because it is a capitalist endeavor, it always boils down to the choices that make sense financially, right? And I will argue that there are things about that choice that don't make sense, right? But in terms of the commenter's question of like, can black designers only design black plays and white designers can? I don't know what the answer to that is, right? Like, I don't know. I'm not white, so I don't know what's appropriate for me to design or not design. I think to me, it's really about a conversation about culture, and exchange, and who has been actually dictating culture. So when you look at 97.8%, those are the arbiters of culture. Those are the people telling us what to like, what not to like, what is aesthetically pleasing, what is aesthetically appropriate, and how that relates to culture. So that is the question. It isn't about, like, should a white designer not design a black play, but who is dictating culture right now, and how much of one particular group of people are actually dictating culture.
I also think that it is opting out the hard question, right? What you're asking is all the hard questions.
Yeah.
It's easy to just look at representation and just like substitute pictures and substitute the orange thing into the red thing or whatever that is. And, we like visual grouping. That's just also a human being. That's sort of how we also get attracted to things. But then I think that what it is really saying, those comments, is like, I don't actually want to engage in how hard it is or what other factors and other questions that you're being raised. But it's easy and it's provocative. And we live in a culture where you know, like we all know this, the critique of thriller is like it started out with certain amount of characters so that you have to grab attention and stuff like that. And that's the thing. And so we always stay in this conversation that's just about plain representation. My question is like, when can we, how much does it take for us to go past it? Like, that's the thing that I'm interested in. I want to look that person in the face and like say, okay, let's just talk about it.
Yeah.
Let's actually break this down and let's actually figure this out. Because like, I want to have that conversation. When can we have that conversation? Is my response.
Yeah, and it flattens everything.
Well, because
Just
it's
like
easy,
a numerical thing.
Yeah, and because we can advertise it, right? That
Yeah.
we can clearly, you know, it's like the number of like different workshop I have to take now is sort of insane.
Yeah.
So, you know, and it's somehow we think that by taking this workshop, you have more competency.
Yeah.
But then I still have gone like I recently. I will be very fake because let's not name names and stuff like that. But I literally have a situation where we have this one show where we have an Asian APAC night of featuring asking like with Asian Alliance helping us to bring audiences in. And then I literally have a marketing person and I was saying to them that, oh, you should tap Cindy's group. Sorry, the name escapes me. They got a Tony for...
APAC.
APAC, right. I just say that. I can...
It's all good.
My brain. Really get them to help. And literally, Tony was in the cast and the marketing director asked me, oh yeah, can you make a connection so I can know who to talk to? And I was like, really? Like, that, like you literally didn't know? So weirdly enough, like as much as the conversation is happening, we also have big gaps. And but then when you just flatten it, you ignore those gaps.
Yeah.
And how can we actually get to those?
Yeah, you're so right about that, Jeanette, because the tendency is to create a binary so you can choose which side to go, right? But there's so much that's actually lost, right? You're ignoring again, the multiplicity of cultural experiences in this country, you know.
I would also even say that even that goes to the fact that we never, in training, when you talk about training, we never even consider the audience.
Yeah.
We think the audience in our training is this monolithic group of people that either they're going to buy a ticket or don't buy a ticket, and that's it. And in order to actually even, like, who am I designing for when I'm being asked to work on a show?
Yeah.
Like, that should be the first step. You know, and then you can make the decision of whether you should never put a veil on that Miss Saigon. But like that's just like there's no consideration. It's like when you say that you're assuming the audience is doesn't like instead of making them uncomfortable, it's also this assumption that they would just don't know what this is if I don't do this thing. So again, treating the audience is like one block of thing and not thinking about who are you designing this for and who will be in your audience and how do you have that conversation.
And since this is a multidisciplinary weekend, is that 5 minutes before I do questions or 5 minutes?
Really? Y'all, this 1 hour is not it.
Yeah. I didn't make it easy for you either. Oh my goodness. Okay, so tell me about Jesse Green in 5 minutes.
Oh, wait, whoa!
Well, no. The actual question is... I'm a professional. The actual question is, since it's multidisciplinary and, I am a writer, what are your pet peeves when it comes to how journalists and critics talk about the work of designers? And if you want to talk about why squint-inducing is an offensive term to use for an Asian show, please feel free.
Wow. What Diep has subtly referred to was the New York Times review of K-pop, where the term "squint-inducing" was used.
About the lighting.
About the lighting. We know what's up. So for me, it really is about again sort of. a lack of knowledge, you know, because ignorance doesn't necessarily, I'm going to be generous and I'm going to say that ignorance doesn't necessarily equate malice, you know, but somebody should have checked. What are my pet peeves about design? You know, because one of my pet peeves really is like just an ignorance about what design is and what we contribute to the experience, right? Again, it, you know, sort of the sentences or sentence that is allotted to the design is often, it flattens it to this argument whether it's beautiful or not. But the moment you walk into theater, you're already experiencing the design. It already is manipulating you towards an emotional experience, and that's a big job. That is you know, that is the experience itself, often. And so I would like, you know, reviewers and writers to actually learn about our process, right? And learn about the conversations that we've had, because yes, we are designers, but we design for the theater. And that is a very specific endeavor. I'd rather actually them not talk about design than give us a sentence about design, whether or not they found it beautiful, pretty, effective, you know, or ugly, you know, all of that.
Distracting.
Distracting. It reduces sort of our contribution to, you know, what essentially was an evening that they've experienced, you know. And I would just like to see more, you know, critics of color, to be honest. Not just because of representation, but because of just like, you know, the amount of culture that they can bring, the amount of points of view, you know, that they can bring, the amount of lived experiences, you know, because one reviewer's take on why they enjoyed something may not be, you know, valid to some of us, or to most of us, actually, you know.
I'm going to start very, very specific. My pet peeve is, can they just even put our name include in...
Hello.
Step one.
Hello.
Because we are all part of the whole team. And that comes with that ignorance of like not knowing what we do, and don't think about what we do is like more ornamental and like, well, we have to see people, so you have a lighting designer. Like, you know, it's like don't think about our work as being part of this entire journey of making this whole entire package and story on stage, and making storytelling in sense and communicating something. Yeah. So I'm going to start really specific and small that way.
Yeah, I think they just need to know more about design. You know, and it's not up to us to teach them, to be honest. You know.
Yeah, I know, but that's a complicated thing. We should have another hour to talk about that.
Okay, well, I can open it to the floor for questions. If anyone has a question, there's a mic. We have microphones.
There's one there. There's one person there in the denim over on this side. Right there. Oh, to your left.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Grab
and
the
then
mic.
the other one.
Grab it.
Grab it.
Hello. I think one of the biggest challenges for designers is when is like the final executive decision. So whenever you guys come to that obstacle, what are some alternative steps or actions that you take whenever an executive decision interferes with your cultural vision?
You have to create an argument. You have to create a really cogent argument about it, you know. And I think that's part of why it's exhausting, because it's something that we do that some of our colleagues don't have to do. It's exhausting to walk into rooms where you have done so much work just to begin the work, to go into rooms where you're the only one. The amount of emotional and psychological labor that you have to do to just literally break the threshold of that room to make sure that you are a whole human being. So what do? I put in more work to create a cogent and intelligent argument why it's necessary.
Hi. Something that I struggle with a lot, and things in America are very black and white, right? So far that everyone who's not white has been put into this big umbrella term that's BIPOC, that I think ignores all the specific struggles and different struggles. And sometimes I feel like the industry perceives us, I mean, what is the industry? Like, we're all part of the industry, but maybe I mean the white gatekeepers. We are perceived as interchangeable. And sometimes you see the Asian designer telling a Latino story or vice versa, or the Latino designer telling a black story or vice versa. And I often struggle with it when I'm offered shows that are not specific to my culture. And my question is it okay, or do you all think about it or not? Like, is it okay because our work is filled with references? Some of those references are cultural specific, some of the references are with the audience in mind. References that they will understand. Is it okay because we're all in the struggle together, or trying to dismantle this, or we're trying to bring diversity to the design teams of theater? So is it okay or not, or is it any different than the very thing that we're trying to dismantle of white designers telling our stories? So my question is, do you think about that, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, the answer to your question is yes. We think about it a lot, and I think that it's the same way that you were earlier. The question about white design designing white show, black design designing black show. I don't know the answer to that because I think that every project is also different. That some project, I would say that I'm not the right person to do it. And then in another project, I may be the right person to do it. Not wanting to talk in abstract, so I'm going to say to you that in this coming fall, I'm going to be doing a version of Madame Butterfly and the opera written by Puccini about Japanese geisha, which you can immediately, just those words put together, we can see where the problem lies, right? And it was a very complicated, it has always been a very complicated opera. And this particular production also gone through some really complicated journey. And ultimately, I say yes to that project. I'm not Japanese. In fact, I have a very convoluted journey. I was actually born in Detroit, grew up in Hong Kong, never learned the words to I pledge allegiance to the flag. So, I'm just very not even typical in some way. And I say, and the person who's going to be directing it is Philip Chang, who is a choreographer, Chinese American choreographer and director. And we have Nana, who is a mezzo soprano, who's going to be a dramaturg, and she sings Suzuki almost her entire life, and is Japanese American, and have family that is in the internment camp. And the reason I bring that up is because we are relocating the entire piece into starting Act 1 in the Forbidden City in the 1920s in San Francisco, and then moving it Act 2 into the Japanese internment camp. So we're totally relocating it. However, one of the things that Phil said that I thought was really interesting was he said that he wanted to do this piece because he wanted to know how to reclaim that work for Asian, not specifically just for Japanese, but for let's start with just reclaiming that. Because a lot of Asian opera singer get pigeonholed into singing those opera also, which is also another way to highlight them, not just to be a token of them, you're Asian, you can sing this role, but really by going through this entire journey. And he used the word that I really contemplated like a lot. I think that there's a difference between integrity, authenticity, and representation. And we are trying to aim for how to make this have the most amount of integrity to do that, right? And so in that project, our set designer is Japanese, recently immigrated to this country actually, and then there is me who is Chinese American, and then there is also Phil. So all to say that it is not exclusively just one thing, but we are all taking this responsibility, and I say yes to that project because of the care that go into it. And I guess to answer your question is like, how much care do we go into thinking about it? And knowing that each project have to stand on its own, have different reason, and because it's not a single answer that it can happen.
I'm gonna look that up. Oh my God. Okay, I'm told to wrap up.
Hi, Queen! Yay!
Queen Jean, ladies and gentlemen, and folks.
Good afternoon, panelists and esteemed collaborators. Hello. Okay. I need it. Is it on? Oh, it's on. Hello. Good afternoon. This question is to the panelists and to the esteemed collaborators and colleagues that are here today. And I think more so a follow-up to our siblings' question. And the question is about cultural capitalism. And in a way, to me, it feels like, and I can speak on my behalf, but that a wave of creating a formula, right, that somehow benefits community. And so if you could talk about that, and I think it is, Jeanette, about the care, right? We can create something that feels like a robust package, right? Something that's exciting, thrilling, that is going to star people. But to me, it often, I wanted to get your feedback about, is it rooted in culture, or is there a deeper context connected to capitalism? Thank you.
I love that question. I think this is a question that I hold close, particularly because I'm in a leadership position in a theater, right? And I think the question is not undoing capitalism, for me at least, right? But is there a way to do things on Broadway or in the commercial venture that is responsible capitalism, right? And as artists of color, for me, it goes back to this original idea of like, I cannot go back to a state that I've never been, right? I am a product of layers of colonization, of capitalism. I come from the Philippines, which is a highly mongrelized culture. And so, is there a way, to me, my own personal challenge is how can I deploy, right, these systems of capitalism to actually use it to serve culture. And there's these opportunities that we all have are never drawn in straight lines, right? And every single opportunity that I get, that I've gotten, I've had to really look at and make a sort of deep dive into myself about like how people who don't look like me are gonna make tons of money over this project, right? How then can I actually, in sort of the scope of my power, how can I use that, right, to serve culture in a way that it's never been asked to do? Because I will never make that money. The people in my culture will never make that money. But how can I use their money to serve our culture? How can I get white people to actually pay for a little bit of culture? That really is the challenge, right? And that requires conversation and really imaginative thinking. Because the revolution can actually be fought in these small ways.
Okay, and on that note, on the third floor is.
Oh, yes. Oh,
Design
okay. So
activation.
we're having a second activation of these wonderful, rising, amazing designers of color on the second floor. Please go and check out the work. They're exemplary and they are the future.